And one thing that's flown under the radar for a lot of people is this push to enact a no-fly zone in Ukraine. And for folks that don't know, let's start with the definition of a no-fly zone, because so many people don't actually know what that means. It sounds like it's being grouped with like sanctions or punishing diplomats or other things that are just, debatable, but they're not that drastic, not that radical. What a no-fly zone, though, means is that the U.S. military sets up an airspace and announces that it will shoot down any plane that enters that airspace. So we've done them in the Middle East before, and they end up causing literal military skirmishes and shooting down aircraft. And if you're not willing to do that, then your no-fly zone is meaningless. So it's a pretty radical proposal, but that is what the leader in Ukraine, I'm going to botch his name, Vladimir Zelenskyy, he's repeatedly asked the U.S. and other NATO countries to put a no-fly zone in place to help them fight back against Russia, so that basically Russia won't have air superiority over them. And he's really being quite dire in his rhetoric about it. How many deaths and losses are still needed to secure the sky over Ukraine, he told NATO. Every person who dies from today will die because of you. And that was a little bit ago, but he's still pushing for this. So take a listen to this news clip. It's him speaking, but you'll hear a translator. But this was with ABC News, and he was asked about this and the concerns people have over it.
Mr. President, I know that no one questions the horror unfolding in Ukraine right now. What the president has said here, and lawmakers really in both parties, Republicans and Democrats, have stood behind the president on this. The concern about protecting and enforcing a no-fly zone over Ukraine would then lead to the possibility it would draw the U.S. into a wider war with Russia, that they're simply not willing to do that.
We are a place in Europe, a place of freedom, a zone of freedom. And everyone thinks that we are far away from America or Canada. No, we are this zone of freedom. And when the limits of rights and freedoms are being violated and stepped on, then you have to protect us, because we will come first, you will come second.
So he's not the only one. Fortunately, a majority, and even in both parties, seems to be rejecting this idea. But you do have some hawks in Congress, like Adam Kinzinger, some conservative media personalities, and then a public letter from 27 experts calling on Biden to enact a no-fly zone. Hannah, can you explain to these experts why that might not be the best idea in the world?
First and foremost, I just hate the term experts. Like, experts of what? Experts of really dumb foreign policy is what it sounds like to me. Like, no, because you're exactly right. Like, this is something that should not, it essentially is going to be an act of war. Like, it's not really hard to figure out, like, how the dominoes fall in this piece. It's you and I have talked about sanctions and kind of our issues around them. This is quite different, and it is being lumped in as, like, just this, like, small thing we can do. Like, what does it take of us to do this? No, absolutely not, because the minute you enact a no-fly zone, you have to uphold it. And that means when Putin, and I do mean when, not if, because we know he would, when Putin crosses it, we have to shoot down their planes. And the minute we shoot down one of their planes, we are now in World War III. Okay? Like, this is not rocket science. This is literally A, B, C. And I cannot believe people are being hoodwinked into some of this. You do see Zelenskyy. Listen, Zelenskyy is a former actor, and I can tell because he is good at this. He is really good at playing this part that he's in right now, stirring up sympathy for him, stirring up sympathy for his situation and his people. And I get it. That's what a leader of a country should be doing. But his intention is not to keep us out of war. His intention is to get back up and help, and I get that. But, like, we have different aims here, because we are not trying to get into World War III. We are not trying to enter a conflict in a region that has nothing to do with us. But he's really playing this part well. He is stirring up sympathy towards him. I wrote a piece at FEE about this week, how we have to be really, really careful about the propaganda around war and the PR around war, because it's very easy to get sucked into it. And it's easy to see these horrific things happening and want to do something, right? That is human nature. I'd like to do something. But what I think we should do is make it easier for refugees to get out, make it easier for people to come here and be safe. Like, that's the actual smart way to proceed that actually upholds human life and, like, keeps us out of other conflicts and keeps more people from from dying needlessly. So the no-fly zone is a terrible idea. And then, like, the other end of it would be if Putin crossed, or when Putin crossed the no-fly zone and we didn't shoot down a plane, then we look really, really weak. You get back into a situation like we saw a number of years ago, like with Obama, where he kind of drew this red line in the sand over Syria, and then, fortunately, to his credit, did not act in that instance, but then he looked really weak, and it was just not a good move for him at all. So we need to avoid that at all costs. The no-fly zone literally benefits nobody. It doesn't do anything except ensure that we will end up in this conflict. And I'm not surprised to see people like Adam Kinzinger, how do you say it? Kissinger pushing for this. He's a real lunatic. He loves war. Nobody likes war more than him. He's like John McCain reincarnated, basically. But it's not surprising. Look at who's calling for this. The experts, that's a clouded word. Who knows who is behind that? But it's definitely the neocon warhawks that are gunning for this.
Yeah, the expert foreign policy class in Washington, D.C. has always led us to good results in the past. Why wouldn't we trust their advice, right? Of course not. And the thing that I have to say about this is I am shocked and disturbed by the ease of which people are advocating a no-fly zone, which we have to shoot down Russian planes and kill Russian soldiers in order to enforce, with a nuclear power. When we talk about a war with Russia, we are risking the fate of humanity itself, the fate of the United States, of putting all our families in danger, right? Honestly, I mean, if enough nuclear bombs exploded, there's something that scientists believe would happen called a nuclear snowball, where it would trigger an ice age and like drastically change our planet's atmosphere, making most of it uninhabitable for human life, even aside from the radiation and the explosions. And it's like, people don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation because, just do a no-fly zone. Why not? We could stop Russian planes. Like, think about the fact that it also bothers me, like Lindsey Graham, for example, Republican senator, big war hawk. He's out here talking about we need to assassinate Vladimir. And it's like, sir, it is very easy to say this kind of thing when you and your family will be in the special government bunker in D.C., 1,000 feet under the ground. It's like you're gambling with our lives and our safety over this admittedly very sad situation, but we cannot be doing these kinds of dangerous and risky things because it's us at stake ultimately.
And the rest of the world too, right? Like, it's not just us being selfish. We are trying to de-escalate the situation and ensure that we don't end up in a nuclear World War III, which is something that has always been concerning and on the table, honestly, since we've developed these weapons. And so people like him are just so careless. Lindsey Graham's been in office for decades, and he never gets smarter. It's bizarre. Like, I don't know how you can be so consistently wrong for so many years and never start to think maybe you're the problem. He's like Taylor Swift back in her dating days when, like, she just, like, kept dating all these guys and writing, like, songs about them, and people were like, sweetie, maybe it's you. Lindsey Graham's like a politician version of that, where he just keeps messing up and getting us in terrible foreign conflicts and getting people killed, and he never realizes it's him. You're the problem, Lindsey Graham. You are. I hate him.
So, you're absolutely right about Lindsey Graham. But I do want to give some credit to the Biden administration on this one, because so far, and look, it's a rare day indeed that I praise these people, but they've been very sensible every time they've been asked about a no-fly zone, just shutting this down and explaining why it's such a bad idea. Listen to Press Secretary Jen Psaki for a second.
On military, is there any way in which the U.S. would support a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
Well, here's what's important for everybody to know about a no-fly zone. What that would require is implementation by the U.S. military. It would essentially mean the U.S. military would be shooting down planes, Russian planes. That is definitely escalatory. That would potentially put us into a place where we're in a military conflict with Russia. That is not something the president wants to do.
So in the same way, we've also had Secretary of State Antony Blinken being asked about this, appointed by Biden, of course, and he also had a pretty reasonable response, I thought.
The president's been very clear about one thing all along as well, which is we're not going to put the United States in direct conflict with Russia, not have American planes flying against Russian planes, or our soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, because for everything we're doing for Ukraine, the president also has a responsibility to not get us into a direct conflict, a direct war with Russia, a nuclear power, and risk a war that expands even beyond Ukraine to Europe.
So, Hannah, I'm happy to give the Biden administration some props on the rare occasion it's due. It seems like they've got their head on straight on this one.
I'll say this, like, the Biden administration has been an utter catastrophe in almost everything they've done, but the one area they've not been terrible so far has been foreign policy, right? Like, I think they botched how we got out of Afghanistan, but I still give them all the credit in the world that they ended that war, because people have been saying they would do it for over a decade and didn't, and, like, he got it done. And now with this, like, I feel like he's actually standing his ground and, like, and really refusing to take the bait that is being lured all around him in D.C. to do this. So I'm pleased. I think we need to give credit where due and keep encouraging that he continued on this pathway, because this is one area they're getting it right so far.
They are, and I'm really hoping that they don't, because obviously they're politicians, they're political. I'm hoping they don't get misled by this big push that's going on from people who want a no-fly zone, where they're saying the American people want a no-fly zone, and they're showing this Reuters poll that finds 75% of Americans think the U.S. should work with NATO to enact a no-fly zone in Ukraine. And I have to say that I'm just deeply, deeply skeptical of this polling, because I don't think most Americans know what a no-fly zone is, or that it entails shooting down Russian planes. I mean, this is a shocking statistic, but I love to throw it out there. Research has shown that only 1 in 4 Americans can correctly name the 3 branches of the federal government, which is the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. A lot of them will say the president, the House, and the Senate. But so if you're telling me people can't even explain the basic features of our government, but we're expecting them to know what a no-fly zone is, because polls like this don't offer a definition. I think if you asked Americans, do you support shooting down Russian planes with the U.S. military in Ukraine, you would get a very different answer. I don't know. So I hope the Biden administration doesn't fall for this very misleading polling.
I just want to say, while most Americans can't name all the branches of the government, I feel confident that Basties can in our audience. So, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Most people are really, really uneducated about policy in general, especially foreign policy, which is quite complicated. And guys, if that's you, I did a really comprehensive episode of The Full Think of Based a couple months ago, digging into our foreign policy, what it was supposed to look like, what we've done so problematically over the past couple of decades. So do your due diligence and dig in. But yeah, Brad, I think you're right. I don't think most Americans actually have any clue what a no-fly zone is, or really even understand just the basic politics of war, how war happens, and how things get set into motion. And so this isn't something we should be crowdsourcing people's opinions on, right? Like, maybe it's kind of elitist of me, but like, this isn't something that we take to the people to be like, how do you think we should go into war? No, like, they aren't generals. They don't know anything about these things in general. And also, when polling, you know, you and I know this, but you can get a poll to say pretty much anything you want. Like, I know how to use a poll and to go to a certain demographic where I feel pretty confident they're going to say what I want them to say. It's not that hard to do. So you've got to always sort of take polls with a grain of salt in the first place, but certainly when it comes to something like this, I think if people had it explained to them exactly what this meant and they got the help thinking through it, they'd probably back off of this pretty quickly, because it really is just a very poor idea that really would have absolutely no benefit.
Yeah, even Reuters, who literally did the poll, kind of admitted this in their release. They said it was not clear if respondents who supported a no-fly zone were fully aware of the risk of conflict. So they didn't know what it was, basically. And majorities opposed the idea of sending American troops to Ukraine or conducting airstrikes to support the Ukrainian army. So when you actually ask them about similar things that are more self-obvious that they involve military force and attack, they said heck no to it in huge majorities. So I think this is very misleading polling, and I think they're pushing the establishment in D.C. Is very, pro-intervention and it's not their kids they're sending to go die over there. So they have a very cavalier attitude towards it all, but I don't think the public does. So I'm glad that we're pushing back and correcting that narrative.
They don't. The war hawks have lost control of both of the two parties, and I could not be happier about that. The American people have finally woken up, and a lot of that is due to Ron Paul and Rand Paul continuing to sound the alarm about this for 2 decades, long before it was popular, back when, criticizing American foreign policy was considered criticizing the troops, and people would hate you for ever speaking out against it. It was seen as like anti-American, anti-patriotic, and those kinds of attacks used to work. And we've seen now with this current conflict going on, the war machine kind of throwing all their old old things, and they're not sticking anymore. Like, it doesn't. People aren't falling for it. They're getting smarter, and they are absolutely opposed to us entering this war. So you just got to watch their language, guys, because they're going to keep trying stuff like this. They're going to keep trying to push things that don't sound as bad as they are. There's no conflict. We have to stay out of it. Like, period. End of story.